But for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of the unknown. I had lived too long bending around other people's needs. Now I was learning to stretch in my own direction. I moved differently now, not faster, not louder, just with more intention, and with every quiet, measured step, I was reclaiming a life I had nearly forgotten was mine. It didn't happen overnight, the shift in them. Just as my silence came without fireworks, so too did their unraveling, quiet, gradual, a series of tiny hesitations and missing comforts, like a room that feels colder. Not because the heater is off, but because someone forgot to draw the curtains. They didn't call, not at first, not for months, and I didn't expect them to. People don't miss what they've taken for granted until the absence starts to show. But life, as it tends to, has its own way of peeling back the layers. The first ripple came from Miriam, the widow to houses down, she mentioned in passing, during our afternoon walk, that she had seen Aaron outside the pharmacy, arguing. On the phone, she didn't eavesdrop, but said she caught a few sharp words, something about being stretched thin and not having help anymore. I nodded politely, said nothing. A week later, I received a card in the post, no return. Address, just a handwriting I knew instantly. Aaron's, inside. A brief message. Hope you're well, just checking in. Let me know if you need anything. The irony, I tucked the card into the drawer with the scissors and stamps, the same drawer that now held the phone, still silent, still off. In the weeks that followed, I heard more from the woman at the bakery, a friend of his wife's, who let it slip that the new flat they'd rented had flooded, something with the plumbing. They were staying with friends temporarily. They've been having a hard go of it, she said, placing my loaf into its paper bag. Young people these days, always rushing forward without looking back. I nodded again, no judgment, no satisfaction, just recognition. I had once been the one they called when the pipes burst. The one with extra towels, extra hands, extra. Now they had no one, and slowly, I realized that wasn't just a burden for them, it was a lesson. Because it isn't until you lose the one who remembers your favorite soup, who knows where the first aid kit is kept, who shows up without being asked, that you realize how much weight they carried without ever raising their voice. I saw Aaron again in passing, almost accidentally. I was exiting the small grocer's, a bag of lemons in one hand, when he crossed the road ahead of me. He was on the phone again, hunched, eyes tired. He didn't see me, or maybe he did and pretended not to. That possibility no longer stung. I simply stepped aside and let the moment pass. Because I had come to understand something essential, that the love I gave was never the problem. It was the lack of reverence for it that wounded me. I had poured myself into their lives, and they had sipped from it like something guaranteed. But now the cup was empty, and they were beginning to feel the thirst. They missed the quiet logistics, the things they never thanked me for, the reminders, the restocked fridge, the soft interruptions that made their world easier. But more than that, they were starting to miss the kind of presence that can't be bought. I know this not because they said it, but because the absence echoed louder than any apology. Her birthday passed, his wife's, and I didn't send a card, didn't knit the scarf I had been planning. The silence stretched wider, and I could feel the shift. One day, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail, as I always did, her voice tight and tentative. "Hi, it's me. Just wondering if we could talk sometime. I think it might be good." I sat with that message for a long while, not out of bitterness, but clarity. I had given them space, and now they were realizing the shape I had left behind, a shape they couldn't quite fill on their own. I didn't call back, because not all requests are genuine. Some are made out of discomfort, not accountability. I had learned to tell the difference. Besides, I had begun building something of my own, a new rhythm. A smaller, quieter world that didn't revolve around hoping or proving. I had made friends at the memoir class. We met for coffee now, 3 of us, sharing stories we never told our families. I had planted hyacinths along the walkway. I was learning to bake croissants from scratch, failing beautifully. I was not angry. I wasn't even cold. But I had grown warm in a different direction. And they, it seemed, had grown cold without me. I imagined they still sit together at night, side by side, each scrolling on their phones in a room that once might have felt full. I imagine there are moments when Aaron goes to mention me, then stops, moments when he wonders whether I'm still upset, still punishing. He doesn't yet understand that I'm not punishing, I'm preserving. He doesn't yet realize that absence is not always a door slammed shut. Sometimes it's a door left quietly ajar, with no one choosing to walk through. They lost more than my help. They lost access to the quiet wisdom that held things together, the memory keeper, the soft place to land, and whether they ever admit it or not, the loss had already begun to shape them. As for me, I had found something steadier than hope. I had found peace, and I was not giving it up for anything. It was a rainy Thursday when I wrote the letter. The kind of rain that taps softly on the windows and makes the world feel smaller, quieter, like it's asking you to look inward instead of out. I had just finished sweeping the kitchen floor, not because I needed it, but because I find peace in the repetition of small things. I had been thinking about it for days, maybe weeks, not a letter to them. I had nothing left to say that they were ready to hear. This letter was for me, or more precisely, for the version of me who had sat by the phone, who had walked home from their doorstep after dropping off the rings, who had tried to swallow the ache and called it grace. I pulled out the heavy note paper I'd been saving, ivory with a subtle marbled border, something I'd bought once for thank you cards I never sent. I sat down at the table. The same table where I had folded birthday cards and grocery lists. And I began to write. Dear Margaret, I started, not Mum, not Mother, not to whom it may concern, just Margaret. Because I needed to remember that before I was anything to anyone else, I was someone to myself. You tried. You really did. And no one can ever say you didn't give everything. Your time, your peace, your quiet mornings, your money, your history, even your heirlooms. You gave your son the softest parts of you. You gave his wife your patience, your presence, even when you knew it would not be returned. And you gave them space, the kind of space that can either be a gift or a test. They used it to step away. You used it to step inward. You thought for a long time that you were grieving them. And in part, you were, but deeper than that, you were grieving the woman who never asked for much, never said no, never demanded to be seen. You mourned the silence that came after giving everything and being met with nothing. But here's what you didn't see, not at first, that silence. It wasn't empty, it was soil, and slowly, you began to grow. You watered yourself with small routines. You pruned the habits that no longer served you. You planted an intention where there once was an obligation. And look at you now. You are still here, still strong, still steady, still full of love. But now that love has a gate, not a wall. Just a gentle gate that you open with care and close when needed. You are no longer waiting at windows. You are walking paths of your own choosing. You are no longer biting your tongue until it bleeds. You are speaking, even if it's just to yourself. You are no longer folding yourself into smaller shapes to fit into someone else's comfort. You are filling your own corners with light. And when they realize what they've lost, when they come with questions or excuses or half-made apologies, you won't need to answer in anger. You'll answer in truth, because you finally remember who you are. You are Margaret Ellis, a woman of grace, of history, of earned silence and chosen solitude. You are not a cautionary tale. You are a lesson in boundaries born too late, but better late than never. You are not erased. You are not forgotten. You are here. I stopped writing there, not because I was done, but because I had said enough, I folded the paper once, then again, and placed it in the same box as the unsent letters. But this one I labelled. I wrote across the top in pencil, "Keep for rainy days." Later that night, I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat by the window. The streetlight flickered on across the way, casting long shadows across the pavement. Somewhere, a dog barked, a child laughed, and the world felt gently indifferent, not cruel, just moving forward, as it always had. But I was no longer being dragged behind it. I was walking beside it now. The next morning, I went through the old photo albums, not out of sadness, but of reclamation. I pulled out a picture of myself, alone, smiling, holding a daisy in one hand, hair tied back in a red scarf. I was 22. It was before the marriage, before the long years of caretaking and forgetting myself. I placed it on the mantel, right next to the candle I light in the evenings. Not to mourn the past, but to honour it, to say, you were real. You mattered, you still do. That evening, I lit the candle early. The flame flickered softly in the dusk, casting a golden hue across the frame. And I began preparing for mine. I didn't announce anything. I didn't write a letter, or confront them, or craft one of those dramatic messages meant to sting. That's never been my way. I've always believed the deepest decisions don't need to be spoken aloud. They just start showing in how you move. So I moved differently. The day after our last conversation, I turned the ringer off on my phone. Just slipped it into the drawer next to the scissors and stamps, and left it there. It didn't ring. Not once. I didn't reach out. No texts, no updates, no reminders that I was still here. Still hoping, still available. I withdrew like a tide from shore, quietly, without explanation. There's a certain power in silence, not the kind used to punish, but the kind used to protect. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sulking. I was reclaiming the air around me. And in that silence, I began to listen to my own thoughts again, ones that had been buried beneath years of compromise and second-guessing. I looked at my hands a lot that week, wrinkled, soft, still steady. Hands that had soothed fevers, tied shoelaces, folded 100 notes into lunchboxes. I had spent a lifetime shaping comfort for other people, but I had forgotten how to do it for myself. So I made lists. I'm good with lists. One for the solicitor, one for the locksmith, one for the charities I wanted to begin donating to, properly this time, with the kind of care I'd once reserved for family birthdays and school fundraisers. I dug out old bank statements and started organising everything, every small account, every pension detail. For the first time in a long while, I looked at the numbers as if they belonged only to me. Because they did. The rings were gone, the cedar box too. But there were still things that hadn't been taken, not just physically, but spiritually. My name, my voice, my will. A week after my silence began, I visited a solicitor in the next town over. A lovely woman, maybe 40, with hair in a tight bun and a warmth in her voice that made me feel less embarrassed. I told her I wanted to update my will, that it hadn't been looked at in years. She nodded, asked the usual questions, and didn't blink when I gave her the answer that changed everything. No, I won't be leaving anything to my son. She looked up, paused, kindly, not judging. I added, I want it to go somewhere. It can do good. Somewhere it won't be treated like a receipt. We spent 2 hours together. She offered me tea halfway through. By the time I left, I felt something I hadn't in months. Dignity. The quiet kind. The kind that doesn't need to be defended or proven. Just worn, like a shawl pulled tight around your shoulders on a windy day. I didn't stop there. I had the locks changed. Not because I feared a break-in, but because I needed the feeling of safety to be real. Not just hoped for. I stood in the hallway and watched the man twist the new brass into place. He didn't ask why. I didn't tell him. I also cancelled the standing order I'd set up for their mortgage contribution. The one Erin had never acknowledged but had grown used to. It had quietly left my account every first of the month for a year and a half. No more. I called the bank and stopped it in a sentence. The woman on the other end simply said, "Done." I stared at the ceiling afterward and let that word settle into me. Done. It became my small anthem. I stopped buying their favourite biscuits when I did my shopping. I stopped setting aside the magazine articles I thought she might enjoy. I stopped scanning my inbox for updates I knew wouldn't come. Instead, I filled my time with small, solid joys. I rejoined the walking group I'd once been too tired for. I started baking again, but not for others. For me, apricot scones, crusty loaves, things I never got to savour, while always sharing. I signed up for a community course at the library. Memoir writing. I didn't tell anyone, I just showed up, pen in hand, and began writing down stories I'd never shared. Not the sad ones, the radiant ones, my childhood in Devon, the first time I rode a train alone. The night I danced in a thunderstorm at age 27 and felt beautiful for the first time since Biko. Mingna mother, I found pieces of myself I'd tucked away like old scarves in drawers, soft, well-worn things I had forgotten still fit, and all the while I said nothing. When Erin did eventually call, nearly for weeks after I went quiet, I let it go to voicemail. His voice was light, like nothing had shifted. "Just checking in," he said. "Haven't heard from you. Hope you're okay." I didn't return the call, because by then I was beginning to understand something no one ever teaches you. Some silences aren't punishment. They're preserved. They're the space where healing happens, where self-worth grows like moss in the absence of trampling feet. They would feel the silence in time, maybe not right away. Maybe not at all in the way I intended, but that wasn't my concern anymore. My silence wasn't loud. It didn't come with fury. It came like snowfall, covering old ground gently, but making clear that something had changed. And underneath that hush, I was preparing to bloom. There's a particular kind of freedom that comes not from gaining anything new, but from finally setting something down. That's what it felt like after I stopped answering. After the solicitor and the locks and the silence, I hadn't won the lottery. I hadn't inherited a fortune or moved to some far-off villa. I was still in the same little house with the ivy creeping over the garden wall and the dent in the hallway floorboard where Erin once dropped a toolbox. But something inside me had shifted, and that shift made everything feel different. I started waking earlier, not because I had to. No one was calling, no one was visiting, but because I wanted to. The mornings were mine again. I would rise before the sun, wrap a cardigan around my shoulders, and make tea in the quiet. No news, no scrolling, no anticipation of a knock or a call. Just the kettle, the birds, and the soft blue light stretching. Across the table, for the first time in years, I began to notice my own life. I walked further. I took side streets just to see where they led. I lingered in charity shops and came home with things that made me smile: a cracked porcelain owl, a velvet scarf the colour of plum, a battered poetry book with someone's name written on the inside cover for Clara. From the days when everything still felt possible, I ran my thumb over those words for a long time. On Wednesdays, I sat in the back corner of the library and watched the people come and go, mothers with tired eyes, children tugging their arms, teenagers pretending to study, old men reading the paper like it still mattered. I didn't talk to anyone. I didn't need to. Just being there, among people but without demands, was enough. I started a little garden journal. Nothing fancy. Just notes on which flowers liked which corners of the yard when the sun hit best, which birds nested in the ivy. I began feeding them again, scattering seed along the windowsill. Within a week, the robins had returned. They didn't need me, not in the way people once had, but they came all the same, and it felt like a kind of grace. one afternoon as I stood at the kitchen sink rinsing teacups. I heard laughter outside, a boy on a bicycle nearly tipped into the hedge, and a woman, his mother, I assume, called after him with a voice full of both love and frustration. I watched through the window and felt something ache and soften inside me. I had a mother I had given, I had been the voice, calling after the bicycle, and now I was the one standing still. But I was not alone, not truly. I had begun to write letters again, not to send, just to say what I couldn't out loud, to the woman I used to be. To my younger self, sometimes to Aaron, though I never signed them. I'd start each one with remember when and let the memories spill out. The time he was 5 and begged to sleep in the laundry basket. The way he used to call my tea leaf soup. The time he told me I smelled like Sunday afternoons, and then I'd fold the letter, place it in a box under my bed, and let it go. Not everything needs an audience. Some truths are meant only for ourselves. I also began visiting a small estate agent in town, not to sell, not yet, just to ask questions about value, about market timing, about where someone like me might live. If they wanted a bit less space, a bit more peace, I didn't say I was preparing to leave. I barely admitted it to myself. But I gathered information like breadcrumbs, quiet steps in a quiet plan. They say reinvention is for the young. I disagree. Reinvention is for the wounded. And I was healing in the only way I knew how, slowly, and with great care, the silence. From Aaron stretched on, I didn't expect anything else. Maybe he assumed I was still sulking. Maybe he noticed the money had stopped and chalked it up to a bank error. Maybe she told him not to press. I don't know. I don't need to, because I had stopped living in the waiting. There was a stillness in my home now, not the hollow kind, but the sacred kind, a space that no longer echoed with unmet expectation. I rearranged the sitting room furniture, moved my reading chair closer to the window. I donated the second armchair to the shelter downtown. I no longer needed to. One evening, I cooked for myself as though company was coming. I lit a candle, set a proper place setting, played music on the old radio. I sliced fresh herbs into the soup and butter the bread just the way I used to when he was small, and I sat alone, eating slowly, savoring. That night, I wrote in my journal, I am still here, and I am learning how to be enough for myself. I didn't know exactly what was next, whether I would stay or move, whether he would call again, or whether the silence would grow permanent. I looked at that girl in the photo and whispered, "You made it," because she had, because I had, and because somewhere between the silence and the surrender, between the betrayal and the boundary, I had found a kind of peace I never knew I needed. The letter didn't change them, but it changed me, and that was more than enough. These days, the house is quiet, but it's the kind of quiet that holds its own rhythm, birds tapping at the feeder, wind curling against the windows, the steady tick of the clock above the mantel. There's no tension in the silence now, just stillness, just peace. I wake with the sun, or sometimes before it, no alarms, no obligations. I stretch in bed and give myself the grace to move slowly. I make my tea and open the front door, just a little, to breathe in the morning. There's something honest about air that hasn't yet been disturbed by engines or voices. It smells like the beginning. The garden is full again. Not perfect, the hydrangeas lean too far toward the path, and something's been nibbling the lettuce, but it's alive. I spend hours there, gloves tucked in my apron pocket, soil under my nails, knees pressed into the earth. I talk to the plant sometimes, just soft murmurs as I work. It feels less like loneliness and more like communion. I've painted the hallway, pale sage. The old beige was too tired, too full of years I've since let go of. I moved the bookshelf, too, into the front room, so I can see it from my chair by the window. I'm rereading books I haven't touched in decades, one chapter a night, no rush. Once a week, I walk to the corner shop and buy myself a single flower. Just one. A tulip, a lily. A stem of eucalyptus if it's in season. I place it in the blue vase on the kitchen windowsill. It's not about beauty, really. It's about offering myself something fresh, something alive. I still hear from the world. Neighbours stop by with jam or gossip. The woman from memoir class sometimes rings me on Tuesdays. We talk about words and old movies, and which biscuits are best with tea. I've even begun writing something longer, not a memoir exactly. Just pieces of myself scattered across the page like breadcrumbs. No one will publish it. That's not the point. The point is, I'm telling my story. Finally, Erin hasn't called again, nor has she. There was a card in December, blank inside, except for their names printed at the bottom. No message. I didn't send one back, not from bitterness, but from understanding. Some doors close not because we slam them, but because we no longer stand in their frame, waiting. It took me a long time to stop waiting, years if I'm honest. But I don't wait anymore. Not for apologies, not for recognition, not even for reconciliation. I walk, I write, I plant, I read, I live, and in doing so, I've come to see that peace is not always loud. Sometimes it's a kettle humming at dusk, a folded blanket on a quiet armchair. The soft satisfaction of knowing the only person you need to prove anything to is already sipping tea in your body. There's a strength that grows in women like me, the kind who gave too much and were left with too little. We don't roar. We don't rage, we rise in silence. We rearrange the furniture of our lives until the rooms feel like our own again. Some evenings, I walk just before the sun sets. There's a stretch of lane behind the estate where the trees lean in close, and the light filters through like gold. Dust. I carry a small thermos and sit on the bench near the bend. Sometimes people pass, sometimes they nod, sometimes they don't. I stay for a while, then return home, where the light is warm and no one is waiting, and yet everything feels full. I think often of the woman I used to be. The one who begged the silence to end, who flinched when the phone rang because she hoped too much. I hold her with such tenderness now. She did what she knew. She loved the only way she was taught, through giving. But I've learned a new way, one where I give to myself first, one where I know the difference between being generous and being emptied, one where I can sit alone on a Sunday and feel no ache. Just presence, just breathe. The rings are gone, the cedar box too. The names in my will have changed. But I've kept what matters, my garden, my books, my truth, and if the past ever comes knocking, I'll answer with calmness, not with open arms, but with steady eyes, because I have nothing left to beg, for nothing left to prove. I am a woman who has weathered storms, and now my skies are clear. I wasn't angry, I was finally empty, and that was beautiful. It's funny how the world doesn't stop when something inside you breaks. The mail still arrives, the birds still call, the kettle still whistles at the same time every morning, as if nothing's changed. But over time, you begin to realize that the world doesn't have to stop, because you've simply stepped out of its old rhythm and begun humming your own. That's where I live now. Not in defiance of the life I once had, but outside of it, beside it, like a quiet lane off a loud motorway, still here, still paved with memory, but softer, simpler, lined with trees instead of traffic. Most mornings now I begin with journaling. Nothing profound, just lines of thought, lists of small joys, questions I don't need answered. The act of putting pen to paper has become my way of listening inward. It's how I know I'm still changing, still softening in places, still firming in others. I've begun to write about things I thought I'd long since buried, my mother's hands, the weight of my father's silence, The way the house smelled after rain when Erin was small and tracking mud through the hallway. I don't write these things for anyone else, not even to be remembered. I write to them because they still live in me, and giving them words lets them rest. Sometimes I catch myself smiling at nothing, at the sound of the wind curling through the hedge on the way, the neighbour's cat perches like royalty on my garden wall. At how I now savour the first sip of tea the way I used to rush through it, always already thinking of someone else's needs. The freedom I live in now isn't loud, it isn't exotic or grand, it's the freedom of not owing anyone an explanation, not being expected to make space where there is none, not translating myself into something smaller so others feel more comfortable. It is the freedom of boundaries, of walking to the edge of what I gave, what I lost, and choosing not to go further. It is the freedom of turning off the phone and not worrying who notices. It is the freedom of sitting in a cafe alone, a book in one hand, a warm scone in the other, and feeling no need to perform happiness, because what I feel is enough. I see mothers now, younger than me, of course, juggling children and shopping lists and endless noise. I offer them a kind smile, a hand when needed. But I no longer ache for those days. I lived with them. Fully, I gave everything I had, often more. What I didn't receive back is no longer my wound to carry. It is simply a fact of history. Like the rings, like the box, like the girl I once was. Sometimes I wonder if Erin ever thinks about that day, the wedding, the box, the silence that followed. Sometimes I wonder if he understands what was truly lost. But I don't dwell there any more. That part of the road has been walked. Now I tend to the garden. The lavender has taken to spreading farther than I planned, but I've let it. There's beauty in things going where they want to go. The bees love it, and so do I. I also feed the robins each morning. One in particular has grown bold. He taps the kitchen sill as if to say, well, aren't we ready yet? I call him Bram. He's become a part of the house in ways people used to be. The quietest kind of freedom is this, not having to explain why you stopped showing up for people who stopped seeing you. No ceremony, no dramatic exit. Just one day, you stop knocking, and slowly, you start nesting inside your own life. There was a time I would have seen that as giving up, as it turns cold, but now I see it as the warmest act of survival, to choose yourself, not out of spite, but out of grace. I live softly now. But not small. There's a richness in this. Simplicity. I notice things I once rushed past, the deep blue in a ripe plum, the creak in the gate that sounds like an old song, the way dust dances in the morning light. I don't fear being forgotten, because I have remembered myself. That's the part no one talks about. When you've been erased, it's not just others who lose sight of you. It's you. You forget your own edges. You become a silhouette in someone else's story. But not anymore. Now I am my own story. I still walk to the bench near the woods. Every Sunday evening, the same one I first sat on after the solicitor visit. I bring my thermos and a biscuit and watch the sky let go of the day. Sometimes a couple passes by and I nod. Sometimes no one comes at all, and the quiet wraps around me like a shawl. And each time I rise to leave, I whisper a soft thank you to the sky, to the past, to the version of me who stayed too long, and to the version who finally stood up and stepped away. I don't know if Erin will ever call again, and if he does, I don't know what I'll say, but I know what I won't say. I won't apologize for protecting my peace. I won't explain the silence, because the truth doesn't always need retelling. Sometimes it just needs living, and I am living now, gently, freely, fully. Not waiting, not needed, just here, just enough. It was a Tuesday when I received the envelope. Not a phone call, not a visit, not even a text message. Just an envelope slid through the letterbox, as though it were a bill or an advert. Inside was a square, ivory invitation with curling golden Script, my hands trembled before I even read the words, but I already knew the wedding date, the venue, the time. My son's name is printed in bold, and no mention of mine, only a scribbled line beneath it all. Please don't come, she wants it small. That's how I found out I wasn't welcome, not through conversation, not even a kindness of pretense, just ink on thick paper, sent from less than 4 miles away. I'm Margaret Ellis, 71 years old. And that was the moment I knew my place in their lives had become optional, a name to be omitted, a shadow they'd learn to live without. Subscribe. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Thanks. I sat at the kitchen table for a long while, the invitation unopened beside me now, like a piece of spoiled meat. My kettle had gone cold. The tea bag sat in my mug, water barely covering it. Outside, the birds kept moving. Inside, something went still. It wasn't anger, not even sadness, not yet. It was recognition, a kind of silent inventory of everything I had ever done for them, suddenly called into question. I didn't cry that day. I wish I had. I simply sat, and then got up and reheated the water like nothing had shifted. But everything had. I kept the rings in a small wooden box, lined with felt, tucked behind the linen in the hallway cupboard, my wedding band, and my mother's before mine. I had polished them both that very morning. Not knowing what was coming, it was a routine I hadn't broken in years. Polish on Tuesdays, groceries on Wednesdays, tea with Eleanor on Thursdays, though she passed 2 years ago, so now that day was quiet. I had once planned to pass the rings down, not in ceremonies or shows, just quietly, maybe on his wedding day. I imagined him slipping it onto her hand, knowing it had carried to generations of promises, that it had survived arguments, dinners, years of barely speaking, and years of loving in silence. It wasn't the gold that mattered, it was the memory pressed into it, the weight of it. But she didn't want me there, not even at the back pew, not even as a guest without a name. That evening, I wrapped the rings in tissue, placed them back in their box, and slipped a note inside. For the bride, since you'd rather I not bring them in person. I didn't sign it, I didn't need to. The next morning, I posted it through their door before dawn. No knocking, no message, just left it on the mat like a forgotten gift. Then I walked home in the cool blue light of morning, past the bakery that wouldn't open for another hour, past the schoolyard fence that still had chalk scribbles from last week's rain. My shoes made soft noises against the pavement, and every step felt like it was walking me further away from the woman I had been for them. I once believed that love meant staying no matter what, that mothers should wait by the phone. Keep the kettle full, remember every birthday and apologize. First, I believed in patience as a virtue, but that morning, something small and strong inside me began to shift. I raised that boy through hard winters and harder silences. I sat by his bed with a cold cloth on his forehead during chickenpox and heartbreak. I clapped when he tied his shoelaces wrong, just for trying. I bit my tongue when he forgot Mother's Day, because sons are forgetful, aren't they? But I never imagined he would forget me. Not entirely, not enough to let her speak the words. You're not invited, and worse, not enough to correct her. There was no anger yet, only cold awareness. Like snow that starts as rain, quiet, then heavier. By Sunday, I had removed the wedding date from the fridge calendar. I replaced it with bake for myself. I didn't attend the ceremony. I didn't check the photos. I didn't ask if they received the rings, because deep down, I already knew the answer. They let me go, not loudly, not cruelly, just quietly enough that it would hurt longer. And once you realize someone sees you as unnecessary, you stop offering pieces of yourself they'll never hold with care. When I think back, and I do, more often than I care to admit, it's not the big sacrifices that ache the most, it's The little ones, the forgotten dinners I kept warm long past dinner time, the shirts I ironed while my back throbbed, the way I'd sit up with the front door unlocked until I heard his key turn. Just so I knew he was home safe. None of it was asked for, none of it remembered. My son, Aaron, was born in late November 1978. The cold came early that year, and the hospital windows had a halo of frost the day he arrived. I remember looking at him and thinking I had never loved anything so instantly, so fiercely. I was 25, freshly married, still learning how to keep the house warm with little more than a kettle and borrowed blankets. But I held him against my chest and thought, this is the only job that matters. His father wasn't a bad man, just a quiet one. His love was in the things he built, not the things he said. He made a crib from pine wood that cracked when you leaned too hard on one side. I still have it in the attic. Even now, when I brush my hand across its side, I remember the lullabies I sang half asleep, the cracked lips from dry winter nights, and the way Aaron's tiny hands would curl around my finger. I was the type of mother who always stayed one step behind him, not in shadow, but in quiet readiness, packed lunches shaped like animals when he was small, extra mittens in case one got wet at recess. Birthday cakes with themes I'd only heard about from the other mums, superheroes, dragons, one year even a tiny volcano with candy lava. I wasn't trying to impress, I was just trying to matter. When he got older, the sacrifices changed. Less frosting, more patience. I helped him with math homework. I barely understood myself, reading the same questions 10 times until something clicked. I volunteered at the school when they needed an extra hand, not because I had time, but because I wanted him to see that I showed up. I sewed his prom suit jacket when we couldn't afford the one he liked. Took on night shifts at the bookstore when he wanted to apply to a college that felt just out of reach. He never knew how tight it got. How many nights I stared at the electricity bill, figuring out how to pay it late enough to delay the fee but early enough to keep the lights on. I gave up little things constantly. My piano lessons, a girl's trip to the coast I'd been saving for, a promotion at work that would have required travel. None of it ever felt like a loss at the time. I told myself, this is what mothers do. You trade in your wants for their needs, and somewhere in the middle of that, love is supposed to grow. And maybe it did, for a time, even after he moved out. I was the one he called when the boiler broke, or when he needed that casserole recipe he liked. I still have the note he left the day he packed up his car and left for university. It said, "Thank you for always being my home." I used to keep it in the fridge, tucked under a magnet shaped like a teapot, when he brought her home. The girl he would later marry, I welcomed her like a daughter. I cooked the same meal I made when he turned 13. I pulled out the nicer dishes. I even wore that coral blouse I knew he liked, the one that made my arms look less tired. She was polite, the kind of smile that never quite touched the eyes. She spoke to me like someone reviewing a restaurant, kind but distant. I chalked it up to nerves. I didn't think then that it would become a pattern. Still, I made the effort. I remembered her birthday. Even when Aaron forgot, I sent cards, small gifts. Once, I stitched her name into a tea towel and wrapped it with lavender from the garden. She thanked me, then used it to wipe up coffee grounds the next morning. I found it later, crumpled behind the sink. I said nothing, because that's what I did. Said nothing. Gave more than I received. Smiled even when I felt overlooked. I offered them the down payment when they found the house. I wasn't rich, but I had saved. Aaron insisted they'd repay me, and I waved it off. "It's for your future," I said, and I meant it. Holidays grew quieter. I hosted Christmas twice before realizing they preferred to spend it elsewhere. I still made his favorite stuffing each year, just in case they changed their mind. I always kept the guest bed made when she started planning the wedding. I asked gently, "Do you need help with anything?" She said they had it handled, that it would be very small, intimate, she called it. I smiled and stepped back. I thought maybe they'd surprise me later with a proper invite, a moment of inclusion. But that ivory envelope held the opposite. I didn't ask to walk down the aisle. I didn't even ask to speak. All I wanted was a seat, a place to witness the day my son said his vows, a place to be his mother. Instead, I sent the rings back. And now, every memory I once wore like armor has become a weight I carry in silence. I used to believe the quiet things I did were my legacy, but it turns out legacies can be misplaced, or worse, erased. It never happens all at once. That's the part no one tells you. You imagine estrangement as a sudden, harsh break, a slammed door, a shouted word, something final. But in truth, it arrives in pieces, quiet ones, the kind that doesn't even sting at first. It starts when your phone rings less, when your name isn't mentioned in stories rattled around the table, when holidays become half invitations, vague suggestions that feel more like obligations, 100 little moments, spaced out over years, until one day you wake up and realize the warmth is gone. Not missing. Just cooled. I used to hear from Aaron every Sunday. That was our rhythm, a 10-minute chat while he did the laundry or stood in the grocery aisle. I didn't mind multitasking. I just liked hearing his voice. And then one week, there was no call. The next, it came late. The next, not at all. I started keeping my mobile near me all day, volume turned up loud. I'd glance at it even during dinner. I told myself he was just busy, that work was demanding, that young marriages are full of adjustment, but the excuses began stacking like an opened mail, piling up until I could no longer pretend they belonged to someone else. I stopped telling people we talked weekly. It wasn't true anymore. I remember one winter, about 3 years ago now. The pipes in my bathroom froze, then burst. I stood ankle-deep in cold water, trying to remember how to shut off the main valve. My hands shook from the cold and confusion. I called Aaron. No answer. Then again, voicemail. I left a message, short and urgent. He called back 2 days later. Sorry, we were at a cabin. No signal. I said nothing about the water damage. Just told him I was glad they had a good time. He didn't ask if everything was okay, and I didn't correct him. That same year, I was admitted to hospital overnight after a dizzy spell. Nothing major, just dehydration and exhaustion. I stayed in a shared ward, curtain drawn, listening to the family of the woman beside me come and go. They brought her magazines, fruit, even a small blanket from home. I held my own blanket tighter and watched the clock. I didn't call him, not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't want to be a burden. That's the shift, you see. When you stop seeing your child as a source of comfort and start seeing yourself as a potential inconvenience. The discharge nurse asked if anyone was coming to collect me. I told her no. Took a taxi home. It cost more than I liked to spend. But the silence cost more. I think I knew then what I didn't want to admit, that I was no longer at the center of his world. That I had become something peripheral, like an old photograph kept in a drawer, occasionally looked at, never framed. His wife didn't help matters. She was never rude, but never warm. She spoke to me the way you speak to someone who brings you your food at a restaurant, polite, transactional, distant. When I gave her a small necklace once, something simple, she accepted it with a thank you that felt rehearsed. I saw her post photos the following weekend. The necklace was nowhere in sight. When I offered to help with errands, she said, "We've got it handled." When I offered to babysit their dog while they traveled, she said, "We already made arrangements, always kind, always final." I stopped offering. Even birthdays changed. Once, he sent me flowers with a typed card, not handwritten, just happy birthday and M. I stared at that ampersand longer than I should have, as though it were a wedge between us. That same year, I made a cherry tart and dropped it off at their house. I left it on the porch with a note. Thought you might enjoy this. It was a recipe I used too. Make when Aaron was little. He'd scrape the crust off the edge and ask for seconds before finishing his dinner. The dish was never returned. I never heard if they ate it. It's a strange thing. To watch your own relevance shrink, I started filling my days with other things. I joined a knitting group at the church hall. I planted dahlias. I baked for the retirement home down the road. I tried to stay useful, to remind myself I still had something to offer. But the ache lingered. It came in waves. The sound of a car door closing out front, and me hoping it was him. The ring of the doorbell, and the disappointment when it was a package, not a visit. The way I still instinctively bought his favourite tea when it was on sale, even though he hadn't stepped inside my kitchen in months, and yet I didn't speak of it to anyone, not even to Eleanor. Before she passed, what would I say? That my son was slipping away and I didn't know how to hold on without seeming desperate. No, I kept it to myself until the wedding invitation arrived, and with it, the unspoken truth became spoken. You can't come. Not, we'd love to see you after. Not, it's just too small for everyone. Not even, I wish it were different. Just, don't. I understood then that this wasn't a sudden cruelty. It was the final stone in a long, quiet wall. 100 small moments, stacked one atop the other. A wall built so carefully that I hadn't noticed how tall it had become. And when you finally see that wall for what it is, you stop knocking. You start walking away. It happened in spring. Not early spring, not the hopeful kind with daffodils and damp grass, but the kind where the blooms are already fading and the air has gone sharp again. April's false promise, the month where everything looks alive but somehow feels colder. I was sorting the hall cupboard when I noticed the box missing. Not just any box, the cedar one with the silver latch, the one that had been tucked behind the extra linens for as long as I could remember. The one that held my savings, in quiet bills and folded envelopes. It wasn't a fortune, but it was mine. Birthday notes from my sister. The tucked-away portion of my pension, and the cash I kept hidden just in case. Every woman I know keeps something like it, a safety net you don't speak of, only hold close. The linens looked untouched, but the box was gone. At first, I thought maybe I had moved it. Maybe I had taken it to the bedroom and forgotten. I searched every drawer, every cupboard, even the attic. I spent 3 hours that afternoon pulling apart the house, not in panic, but in slow disbelief. I was to calm. That's what struck me most. I wasn't worried the money was lost. I was worried I already knew who had taken it. A week before, they'd visited, just for a quick stop. They said she had come inside to use the loo, and Aaron had stayed in the car, engine running. They hadn't been inside in months. I remember being startled by the knock, my apron still dusted with flour from baking. I offered tea. She declined. She'd only been in the house for 5 minutes, but that was enough time. I didn't want to believe it. I called the bank first to check if anything strange had happened with my accounts. But this money wasn't in the bank. That was the point. I'd always kept a part of myself in that box, for things too personal, too small to explain. After 2 days, I sat down and called him. I asked if maybe she had seen the box. I didn't accuse. I didn't raise my voice. I kept my tone light, like I was asking about a borrowed casserole dish. He paused, too long, then came the answer. Mum, if it was that important, maybe you should have put it somewhere safer. That was it. No question of when it went missing. No offer to help look. No curiosity. Just a subtle insinuation that I had failed in some way, that it was my fault. I hung up shortly after, still polite, still calm. Then I sat in the kitchen with the curtains half drawn and my tea gone cold. I didn't cry. I Didn't scream. I just stared at the tiles on the floor and thought, they think I'm powerless. It wasn't just the money, it was what it meant. That they could come into my home, take something precious, and count on my silence. The wedding had already passed by then. I hadn't asked for photos. I hadn't asked how it went. But that week, she posted a picture online, their honeymoon. A dinner table covered in candles and wine. The caption read, "Grateful for the people who helped make this possible." I read it twice. I've never liked social media. It makes people to bold in the wrong ways and to cowardly in the ones that matter. It turns real gratitude into performance and cruelty into absence. Still, I read that caption and I thought of my cedar box. She didn't need to use the bathroom. She needed an excuse to go inside. It wasn't proof, but it didn't need to be. Erin called 2 weeks later, not to apologize, not even to follow up. Just a casual check-in, as though nothing had shifted. I listened as he told me about their upcoming move, a bigger flat, closer to the city. He said they'd finally saved enough for the deposit. We scraped together what we could, he said. Almost proudly, and I thought, did I help fund it? Did the money I set aside for emergencies, for dignity, for breath, did it buy their floors? Their walls? I didn't ask. I just said, "That's nice, I hope it feels like home." That was the final break. Not the theft, not even the silence. It was the realization that they saw me as a means. Not a person, that my presence was optional, but my resources were not. That I was good enough for deposits, for traditions passed down in rings, for standing quietly in the background, but not good enough for a seat at the ceremony. Not good enough for trust. I had spent a lifetime, giving not out of obligation, but out of love. The real kind, the kind that stays up late when they're sick. That sacrifices and remembers and folds the napkins the way they like. That keeps extra gloves in every drawer, just in case. But love without respect becomes servitude. And I hadn't noticed when the shift began, the morning after that call. I didn't open the curtains. I stayed in bed. I listened to the birds outside and let them sing for a while before I rose. Then I made a list, not of things to forgive, but of things to reclaim. They had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. They had taken without asking, denied without remorse, and left me holding the ache as though it belonged to me, so I stopped waiting for their return.